Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Justice and Peace's guest speaker series as we've been talking to paralegal and lawyer bencher candidates about the upcoming election. As always, the views and opinions are of the candidates alone, and they don't reflect me, Justice and Peace's, Charles College, or any other education institution or organization that I'm affiliated with. Continuing today, we have Matt joining us. So Matt, first of all, thanks for taking the time to speak with us, and perhaps maybe you can give us a little bit more about yourself.
Oh, thanks for having me first. It's a pleasure to join you this lovely morning. My name is Matt Wilson. The ballot will say Matthew Wilson. Please don't get confused. I'm running for bencher as part of the Good Governance Coalition. I'm not a politician. I'm going to start with that. I'm a self-professed governance nerd. I really love governance. I really love getting involved in things with governance. And when I'm looking at how the Law Society has been governing itself for the last 4 years, I look at challenges going into the future. I look at where we are as a profession, and I think that I can help. I've always had this desire to try to make things better for people, for groups that I'm involved with, for my communities. I think it's important. I think it's a privilege we have to be able to do what we all do. And I think part of that privilege is to give back. And that's me in a nutshell. That's why I'm running for bencher. I'm not running because I want to see my name emblazoned somewhere. I'm running because I want to make a difference, and I think I can. I think I can bring a view of collegiality to the table, a view of trying to build consensus. And I've done that in a variety of governance situations. I'm currently the vice chair of the London Health Sciences Centre here in London, Ontario, where I'm currently am this morning. Healthcare is a large, complex beast. I'm sure everyone can appreciate that. It's gone through a lot in the last few years as well. I will be chair of that organization come this summer. And just like with the hospital, wanting to give back to the London community, that's what I'm looking at doing here. As a lawyer, I'm a real estate practitioner. We deal with trying to get deals done. We deal with trying to keep people happy and get them into their homes and help their small businesses and large businesses and create communities where people live and play and laugh and work for decades after I'm dead and gone. And I really love what I do. But to practice real estate law, you also you have to be practical. You have to be an advocate for your clients. You have to know at the end of the day you want to try to get the deal done, and that means you have to be able to talk to people, and you have to be able to find common interests and goals and work together. And that's what I hope to bring to Convocation: the ability to work with people, both from the coalition and anyone else who is elected, to try to move Convocation forward, move the Law Society forward in interest to protect the public, to make sure we are governed properly and civilly and with a spirit of collegiality for the betterment of everybody in Ontario.
Now, Matt, you certainly touched on it already there in terms of some of the reasons why you're running, and you referenced obviously running as part of the Good Governance Coalition. So perhaps maybe you can expand a little bit more onto some of the other reasons you're running, and specifically why as part of the coalition and not, say, independently or without affiliation.
Well, I didn't actually seek out to run. I was approached by a number of people who I trust and respect who asked me to consider putting my name forward. And a lot of thought and consideration went into the decision before I threw my hat into the ring. The people who asked me to consider running are people who are affiliated with, either running or aligned with, the coalition. And I looked at what the coalition stands for, again, things like, collegiality and trying to practice principles of good governance. We're a large board of directors, but we are a board of directors. We're not the Ontario legislature, right? To try to bring that sort of spirit of working together, which is what I believe in. And even though I'm part of a slate, I do believe that these slates are not good for the long-term health of the profession. We are seeing in this election campaign, mudslinging and comments being made by people from all different types of people who are running. And like I said at the beginning, I'm not a politician. Right? I don't like that. I don't appreciate that. There's a lot of misinformation out there as well. The one thing the slate stands for up front, they said we don't want to have political parties. We don't want to politicize campaigns going forward. We don't want to have this in going forward. Effectively, we don't want to have to resort to what we had to resort to now to be able to, break through another voting block, and that's something I believe in. It's voting blocks in many ways can be a means to an end, like they are here. But you have to be able to have an independent voice, and I encourage everyone who is voting. Of course, I would encourage everyone to vote for me, and I would encourage everyone to please do consider the members of the Good Governance Coalition. There's a lot of really great people on that slate, but make sure you take a really good look at everybody in the voters' guide. Right? It's your responsibility, be it as a lawyer voter or paralegal voter, to make your votes count.
Yeah, so that certainly comes across very interesting with talking with some of the other Good Governance Coalition members as well, with this the slate that's sort of here in response to the Stop or now Full Stop team. However, if we're elected, as you pointed out, that we would look at getting rid of slates potentially altogether, or other electoral reform, and everyone trying to sort of follow the lines there to see how this all kind of makes sense, right? And if there is an election, though, there's a possibility certainly that it could be split between the groups with some unaffiliated candidates, as you pointed out, that we may have the same kinds of issues, which may make it difficult to kind of go about on your own, because if you do so, then the other side might have more votes for a particular issue. So how do you kind of make sense of all of this there in terms of slates, being able to associate with others, and the public interest, rather than, as you pointed out, it's not a legislature. So how would you kind of connect the dots here on all of these things?
Well, to me, protecting the public interest is primary. Right, the Law Society Act sets out what the principles of the Law Society are to be. I think those need to be respected, and I think we need to be able to work with everybody. This is not ingrained political parties. It shouldn't be. They should have no place at convocation. This isn't yelling for sound bites. This really should be trying to work together. We have, as directors, we have fiduciary obligations that we must understand. We have obligations to the organization. We have organizations to the licensees. We have obligations to the public. I think if we remember that and we try to work together, it doesn't matter where a good idea comes from if it's a good idea. Right? Let's find ways to find those commonalities and those common grounds. And if people are showing up and they're doing their homework and they're reading the documents and they're putting forward well thought out positions and arguments, I'm not going to agree necessarily with every single thing every single person says. It doesn't happen, right? People have different views on topics, but if we can have that conversation in a respectful manner and respecting the people around the table, right, that's going to lead to better outcomes, because any good decision needs to be looked at from every angle. Every good decision needs to be thought out and well considered and well reasoned. And not just because it's this position or that position, but a well-rounded view as to how do we meet those end goals that we're obligated to meet. How do we protect the public? How is what we're doing protecting the public? And as long as there's people around that table who are willing to have dialogue and conversation, that's all that matters.
So in terms of maybe looking at our elections, or essentially how we're choosing our board of directors or benchers, at our meetings or convocation, have you given any thought to, whether it's the size of the board, whether it's how people are voted, whether it's the number of votes, right? Or location, right? You're out in London, but I can vote for you, and all other Toronto lawyers can vote for you. All sorts of things that I've heard and discussed, with a number of other candidates. But have you given any thought of if everything's working, whether on the slate front or certainly even more holistically in terms of getting those diverse voices as part of the board?
Well, I mean, I have, I've said this to a number of people, not just in this context, but just because something's always been done that way doesn't mean it's right, but it also doesn't mean it's wrong. But it does mean everything should be able to be looked at. I think there are issues with how the system currently works. It's a system that's been in place for quite a long time, but there have been changes. I mean, we've changed the number of paralegals who actually have votes as benchers. When paralegals first joined, not all of the paralegals actually had votes at convocation. Right, it was 2 of 5. So things do change over time, and we need to look at it. I think the other thing we need to look at, and not just with size and composition and how votes happen, we need to look at making sure. I don't know how we would do this, but how making sure that there is a mix. I'm a solicitor, right? Like I don't go to court. Thankfully, I work with some great people who do, but I don't. There's a lot of times when you look around convocation and there may be 1 or 2 solicitors out of the entire group, right? I'm not saying that we're something special. It's just the needs and the views of now having solicitors going to discipline with people who don't understand a solicitor practice, and vice versa, right? It's about fairness. Speaking of fairness, though, the other thing I think that needs to get looked at is how campaign financing works for venture elections. When I started going down this road and looking at this process, I was shocked at the fact there really is no campaign finance restrictions. Or there's no spending restrictions. There's, and there's no even restrictions that funding only comes from Ontario, right? There's nothing, right? And how does that make sense, right? It's asking the questions though, right? I don't want to presuppose an answer. I want to be able to ask the questions and then work through what the answer should be in a well thought out, well researched way, not just a shoot from the hip way.
Now, Matt, besides sort of the electoral reform and the slates and everything, what are some other things there? Again, you mentioned the solicitor perspective, but what are some things there that, if elected, you'd like to bring to convocation to discuss and perhaps look at any changes that the law study could be doing?
Well, I mean, some of the issues that I want to look at over the next couple of years, are matters that impact both, licensees, but as well as how the public is protected. Right? It's looking at protecting the public does not necessarily mean at the expense of licensees. It's looking at how everything is balanced. One example of that is, the changing rules on remote verification of clients. Fraud is a huge issue. Right? Fraud is absolutely a huge issue, and it needs to be looked at, and it needs to be stopped as much as possible for the protection of the public. Real estate lawyers have been dealing with fighting fraud for decades, right? Not everything is perfect, but it's something that we are well aware of. And you look at what the Law Society is trying to implement with the changes and to how that remote verification works. To me, it could also have a significant access to justice issue, because sometimes people are not as familiar with certain technologies. They might not be able to go through the steps to verify themselves remotely, which then might limit their choice of counsel. You have people who might, because of any number of different factors, including injury or aging, might not look like their ID for anymore, for example. Doesn't mean they're not who they are, right? But how do you address issues like that, which again balances an absolute need to make sure we are fighting fraud with ensuring access to counsel, and ideally counsel of choice on behalf, for the public, right? That's just one, I'm saying small, but not small issue, right? It's something that we need to look at, looking at a variety of different services that are provided, making sure that we are providing the proper resources to the bar, supporting the law libraries, supporting legal aid. Also looking at the certified specialist program. There's a lot of discussions around that, around how that happened, around how the consultation happened. I mean, I am slightly biased on that because I am a certified specialist in real estate law. But the fact that they were looking at terminating a program and didn't reach out to the people that are most impacted by it directly for conversation and feedback, I question sometimes the level of consultation that happens, and making sure that the voices of licensees as well as the voices of the public are listened to and respected.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly, from as well talking with others about the certified specialist program and of kind of walking back what they were intending to do, and just trying to understand, from a current bencher, how that process works. And sometimes, when it goes from committee then to convocation, there's things there that are only looked at that point that should have maybe looked at earlier, or vice versa. Anything else in terms of the process there, or I mean, maybe from your experience being vice chair and chair on various other boards, in terms of maybe more efficiency that can be brought to the Law Society?
Well, there's always room for efficiency. I mean, organizations live or die by efficiency. Real estate practices live or die by efficiency, right? Committees are a very important part of any governance structure, but the committees have to be set up properly. They have to be properly resourced, and they have to be respected. Right? I'm not saying that if a committee report comes to a board or to convocation that it's sacrosanct and can't be touched. What I'm saying though is finding that line between being able to make certain amendments that you can make at convocation, and ones that are fundamentally different in the recommendation that may be worth sending back for further consideration and feedback, as opposed to simply going by wherever the winds are going that day. Right? I mean, this is the change in the certified specialists, for example, to me at least. If convocation didn't agree with the recommendation with regards to the grandparenting of the designation, which may or may not have been the right recommendation to make, has a fundamental impact, which we saw from the reactions to everybody through it. That to me, that would have been an example of something to separate from the rest of the motion that was in front of convocation, and maybe send that piece at that point back to committee for further discussion and review, which is what ended up happening anyways. Right? They eventually got to that point. It just took a lot for them to get there. I mean, I wasn't around that table though, so I don't know exactly the process that they had. I don't know exactly what happened, but from a speed sometimes is not the answer. Getting the right decision is the right way to go.
Now, Matt, certainly you brought up their legal aid and law libraries and funding there, and certainly in particular the law libraries we talked about quite a bit there. I know FOLA had their survey that they were sending out to some of the candidates that responded. So again, what are your thoughts there in terms of, again, with a lot of things that need to be funded? I mean, it certainly comes to the issue of fees and sort of the balance there of what we can put in. And we were mentioning efficiencies, also financial efficiencies, right, in terms of spending and where we can kind of maybe reallocate some of the resources. So I don't know if you've had a chance, or certainly, again, not being an incumbent, not necessarily knowing kind of the nitty gritty of the finances there, but how to kind of make all of this work where it doesn't result in another $200 a year increase on fees across the board or something like that.
Right. No, I mean, this is a tight fiscal environment for everybody. People are feeling it in their pocketbooks. I think that we have a responsibility, even not in a tight fiscal environment, to make sure that we are being prudent and responsible with the money that we are entrusted to spend as a law society. I think, though, that we need to look at it with a scalpel, not with a sledgehammer. Right? There are certain programs that perhaps can be more efficient. There are certain areas that perhaps money can be saved. There are areas that do excellent work that support the goals of access to justice and for protecting the interests of the public, like the law libraries, like legal aid, that need to be protected and need to be looked at. I mean, we have the compensation fund, which protects the public. But we need to be able to look at everything. We need to be able to do the review and roll up the sleeves and dive in and see what money can be saved. But we can't say it's going to be X% across the board cut, because it's not realistic, it's not sustainable, and it can hurt more than it can help. Scalpel, not sledgehammer. I will say I did look into this because this is an issue that keeps coming up. Um, our law society fees are actually one of the lowest of the law societies in the country. Right, we're lower than Alberta, we're lower than Manitoba, we're lower than BC, we're lower than New Brunswick. Does that mean we're low enough? No, no. It's important to remember the context, though, right? I mean, we do have a lot of lawyers, which does spread that cost across more licensees, right? But if you have, just use a round number, right? You have 50,000 lawyers in Ontario, and you want to cut, everyone's fees by $200, right? Which is a little more than 10%, right? I mean, people can do the math, right? You have to find a way to cut $10 million. It's a lot of money.
Yeah, so I mean, certainly on that point, the Full Stop team is running with, essentially the law society has lost their ways, and the focus on stop bloat, stop creep, stop woke. Again, ways to point out efficiencies, and you said you don't necessarily take a sledgehammer to it or cut 15% across the board without looking at specific areas where there's some deficiencies. But I mean, what in terms of some of that messaging, in terms of the good governance group coming in response to, I mean, what would you point out as problematic with what they're saying?
I don't really want to sling any mud in their direction. I mean, their messaging is their messaging, and they are, there are certain parts of the electorate that are attracted to that messaging. Bloat to me implies that it's, there's a lot of money to be found. I think that there's enough ventures that have been around over the last years, including members of that other slate, that no one wants to spend more money than they need to spend, right? So it's how do you look at it? How do you work with management at the Law Society to work at it? Looking at what is the core mission, and with regards to whether the Law Society is or should not be woke, if you will. First off, it's a word that I absolutely hate, that I find that a lot of people south of the border just throw around at things that they just don't like as a way to say they don't like it. I think in order to even just to protect the public, right, we need to be able to be seen as a leader, to be at the forefront. We need to move beyond the, and thankfully we are, but it's still very, very slow. The old white boys club of a legal profession, right? That you can't serve a population unless you understand a population and people who, every different voice around the table, around a profession is valuable, is needed. And we're even looking at this at the hospital. I mean, looking at our own composition as a board, EDI initiatives. I realize where I'm sitting right now is from a very privileged position. I'm a middle-aged white male who grew up in a upper middle class family who was able to get a good education. I started out by effectively winning the lottery. Right? I recognize that and I appreciate that. And there's a lot of people who did not have the opportunities I have, but also have their own lived experiences that are absolutely valuable and bring valuable perspectives to the table. And I think we as a profession, yet alone we as a society, need to be able to lift up and encourage and celebrate everybody, period.
Now, Matt, I guess maybe looking at it from a different point of view of the role of the Law Society, right? That as a regulator in the public interest and their mandate, which we talked about before, and that kind of touches on some of the points you just brought up there. But I mean, what should the Law Society be doing as a leader, right, in the legal profession, obviously, in particular, in terms of balancing, obviously, the roles of lawyers and paralegals and the competencies and things like that, but as well in the public mandate, right? I mean, where do you sort of see positioning the Law Society, as you said, as a leader in keeping all of that into consideration?
I mean, first and foremost, I'll say the statement of principles is dead and it's not coming back. I just want to make sure people are very clear on that. I mean, forced speech has no role. However, doesn't mean that people shouldn't be able to have to understand and learn and grow, right? We're in a profession where, at least in my experience, I'm learning something new all the time. right? I love that aspect of it. And I love that, I want to understand what I don't understand. Unfortunately, not everyone is in the same boat, but I think it's important that to be able to serve the people that we serve, to be able to understand is important. I don't suggest people have to change minds. I think though people need to understand, right? I mean, there's some challenges that are coming out with some conversations even around some changes to the proceedings authorization, for example, and what they're allowed to do. And there's some conversation there about mandating CPD as an alternative. And this is now going down. Some people are taking down the road of brainwashing or things like that, which I don't think ever was the intent of that recommendation. But I do think that's still a recommendation that needs to be considered, because to me, when I'm looking at that, and again, this is not something I know all the answers to, but something I want to dive into. So I'll just go off of what preliminary thoughts are. Right now, if a lawyer is going and has an issue and is looking at discipline, you have an invitation to attend, which you can say no to, and then either you have actually going to a full hearing or having the matter dismissed effectively at that point. To me, there needs to be some sort of middle ground, but it needs to be also some sort of optional middle ground. Like pleading guilty before going to trial in a criminal matter, or a diversion, before you even so there is no criminal record, right? If it can be resolved by CPD and everybody agrees to it, great. But I wouldn't force somebody to take a program. And then if they don't want to take the program, then proceedings authorization should be able to consider, okay, now what? Now is it going to go to a full hearing? Are we going to dismiss, or is it going to be an invitation or a mandated attendance? But don't make CPD in that context mandatory. I think CPD is important overall. Again, I think we need to learn. I go above and beyond every year my 12-hour requirements. I also speak and participate in a number of CPD programs every year. I think that's part of my responsibility of passing on and sharing knowledge and giving back. But yeah, I would not think that mandating a course, for example, even though it could be a possible negotiated resolution, is the way to go. But again, I don't know all the nuances of it. I don't know all the details of it. I'm just going based on what I, as an outsider, feel. But it doesn't say that that's what's going to end up. But I say let's have some conversations around it. Let's look into it. Let's hear from everybody, and figure out, because sending cases that don't need to go to the tribunal, right, is you can still serve the public interest and protect the public in another way, and in a cheaper, more efficient way.
Yeah, certainly. I know even the recent Jeremy Diamond case, right, where there's concern of if you're admitting to something and then you can't kind of walk that back later, that if it happens now at an earlier stage, the issue of due process may come up there as well. But certainly, as you point out, that there's more to it than something that's that simple. And again, looking at costs and efficiencies on the other end via the due process there. Now, Matt, last couple of questions there. Certainly, I have some students of mine, paralegal students, but law students who might be listening, or newly licensed lawyers, and they're looking to come into this profession. A lot going on. With all your experience, do you have any advice or any words of wisdom for the students that are coming up in the profession?
I think the number one thing, we find a mentor, maybe more than one, someone who you can go to, who you can respect, who you can learn from, someone who you want to maybe emulate, someone like you said, someone you respect. It's amazing, you connect with the right mentors, what you can learn from them, and how they can assist, even if it's informal or formal mentorship. But also keep your mind open, right? The law is a fantastic profession in that there are so many different aspects of it, right? I mean, I really love what I do. I do. I really enjoy the real estate work, and I know other people who say that what I do is probably the most boring thing on the face of the earth, right? There are people who practice in such diverse parts of this province, in such diverse areas of law, people who go in-house, people who don't practice law anymore, but who still have that background. Just be open to finding what you are really going to be passionate about. I find that people tend to do better at what they're passionate about. They tend to be happier. I mean, life, it might be long, but it goes by very quickly. So you don't want to be doing something for 40 years that makes you miserable every day. It's not worth it. You know, find a mentor and try to find something that you love to do. Not every day will be perfect. Not every day will be stress-free. But as long as if you love what you do, it definitely makes it easier to go to work in the morning.
Perfect, Matt. So last question here for any of the lawyers that are listening and have up to 40 votes in this current election. Why should they cast a vote in your favor?
If you're looking for someone who wants to try to bring people together, who wants to work civilly, who wants to try to build consensus, who is open to finding solutions that work for licensees as well as protecting the public interest, who promotes access to justice, who supports law libraries, who supports legal aid, who supports the diversity within our profession, I would encourage you to please vote for me. One of your 40 votes, I know that there are a lot of really great people running. I would be honored, I would be humbled if I was one of your choices. And I will dedicate myself to doing what I do, which is trying to serve my community as a bencher. So I would very much appreciate your support.
Thanks again, Matt, and thanks for everyone for tuning in. All the best. Take care.
Thank you.